Welcome back, Wargamers. So recently I decided I was going to make a set of rivers, and I tried the traditional method, which is using styrofoam and kind of cutting out a riverbed and then trying to use resin to make water effects and doing just a kind of typical thing I've seen over and over again on different terrain channels. And it was taking forever to just get small lengths of river done. And I decided too that wouldn't it be kind of cool if your rivers kind of, were able to flow down hills that you had and were kind of flexible and weren't so rigid and could only be used on flat terrain. And so as I was thinking about this, I thought, you know what? I've used canvas before to make my battle mats. And I've covered it in this latex caulk that if you've seen any of my videos before, I use it in a lot of my terrain and basing. I thought, you know what? I bet you I could cover little strips of canvas with this caulk, paint it, add some texture, add some different kind of basing shrubs and greenery from Army Painter, and make a pretty good looking river that could also be modular. You can make a bunch of different sections and also, again, bend to different terrain, put it on hills, and what have you. So I'm going to attempt to do that today using this canvas. I've here kind of mapped out what I want to do in here. I'm just showing you how flexible it will be. And that's a great thing about this caulk. It really can take a beating. It's durable, and whatever you put it on remains flexible. So not only is that great for when you put it on the table, but it's also great for storing your terrain. You know, you can roll it up if you have to, or at least stack it pretty easily and have a nice little thin pile that doesn't take up too much room in your storage. So that's going to be the goal today. Now, I haven't tried this before, so I'm going to do my best to kind of blunder my way through this little project. But I think it will work rather well. It will utilize more painting techniques than sculpting, so I think it will be quicker. In that little section of foam river that I attempted, it took me forever just to sculpt out something that looked halfway decent. And I think by kind of painting an effect that kind of simulates depth of the river, and by using some techniques to make it look like the river bank is kind of higher than it actually is, we'll get a nice little illusion going here. So I'm going to go through the different steps, different materials. I'm just going to use some sand, some kind of coarser gravel for the river bank. It's really not going to rise very much higher up from the canvas. One thing too is I'm going to attempt to put on all my grit and my texture on after I've laid down my latex, before I just mix it all together. And I found that I had some cracking issues on my battle mat. So I want to try and see if I put it down first and then add on my texture, that I can cut down on some of those issues that I was having before. Total making these rivers took me only about an hour and a half of actual, hard labor time. But I had lots of time that I needed for drying. And just remember, when you're dealing with this latex caulk, use gloves. You're going to need them. It'll get everywhere. And I hear it's not too good for your skin or your health. So use gloves. And I'm going to use this little spatula here. So the first thing that I'm going to do when making this river is I decided that I was going to go ahead and make the river banks first, so I could kind of see, kind of get a feel for how much room I'd have to work with as far as the waterway is actually concerned. And also I could kind of sculpt out, how much bend or how much I want the bank to take up of my river. You can obviously paint the river first and put on your banks if you wish, but this is just what I did. So I went ahead, put down my kind of fine sand and my gravel down there. I'm going to do a pretty simple river. I'm imagining that this is kind of a big, major river, and so it's not going to have too many bends or too much variation in its width. And again, when you're doing this, you can go all out and make, tiny little streams that bend all over the place, or just copy me as I did, or even make less of a bank. It is up to you. So again, I'm just kind of putting that sculpting putty where I'd marked out where I wanted my banks and filling it with kind of the coarse gravel and fine sand. All right. And, you can use dirt that you find outside. You can use any of your typical basing material for this. And you don't want to layer it too thick. You don't want to put too much caulk on there. Again, I want it pretty thin so it will remain flexible and won't crack once it dries. And then I'm going to go ahead after I got that finished, and I'm going to put down what will be kind of my waterway. You might get a little bit of sand or gravel in the middle of your waterway. That's fine. Don't worry about it. There's rocks in the middle of rivers. If you really want, you can use your my caulking knife here to get rid of those extra bits if you need to. So I went ahead as just kind of a test subject. I went and painted one of the lengths of my river already just to get a feel for what I'll do. And I like the effect. So as you can see, what I did is I kind of have this really dark blue middle that kind of blends out into kind of a lighter blue and then into kind of a light green and then onto the banks. And it has this nice illusion of depths of having shallows, having kind of a mid tier depth to your river, and then the real depths there in the middle. All right. And again, it's completely flat, but just by painting it and using some painting techniques known as wet blending, which you may use on your miniatures, it will get a pretty good effect for you. All right. And I'm only really going to use, as you can see here in a moment, only 5 different paints to get this effect. And it's pretty easy. If you're scared of wet blending, if you tried it on miniatures and failed, it is much easier when you're using a much bigger surface, as we are here, like this large canvas. So it's actually quite easy. And with these craft paints, you have quite a bit of dry time. I mix them with quite a bit of water, so you don't have to worry about them drying out while you're blending them. So I'll show that technique, but don't be afraid. And it was actually pretty quick. The paint time was probably 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more to get that effect. So all I'm using is a black. I'm using kind of a dark brown color here. A light blue, a dark blue, and then this green ochre, which is like this green yellow, which will be nice for the shallows, especially when you blend it with the blue. It's nice to have a little bit of a yellow hue to your light brown paint, as you'll get that nice green color that kind of looks like water is washing it over the shallows. So those are the 4 paints. I'm not, you don't have to be a stickler on which type of paint you use, or really the exact color. I believe one's cobalt and one's like navy blue. But you'll get this effect with a variety of different paints. It's just, again, cheap craft paint that I used for this. So I'm going to begin by painting a black line down the middle of my river. And I'm doing this just as kind of the base layer of what will be the deepest part of my river, the depths. Don't worry about putting on this black layer too thick, as you're going to be blending into this with your blue colors, so the black won't show through at all. You'll get a nice blend to simulate the really deepest parts of your river, as you saw on my example over there on the left. Can't see any of that black, so don't worry about that. And then you will go ahead and put your green ochre, or your ochre color, and you'll line the banks of your river with this as your other kind of base layer, which you're going to blend into. I make sure that I put this kind of where I kept most of the sand and not the dense gravel, again, to simulate those sandy beaches along rivers and the shallows. And as we blend our blues into this, we'll get this nice kind of green color that looks kind of like water, shallow water running over a nice sandy beach. So we'll do this on both sides, and don't really worry about how far you paint this color. You'll be doing enough blending. You can get the get the tone that you want pretty easily. And I don't thin my paints very much when I'm wet blending, especially with these craft paints. They don't take to being thinned very well, so I pretty much put them on as thick as possible and to get enough coverage to where I don't have to go over it too many times to keep it quick. So now that I have that portion done, I'm just going to speed up. I forgot to record the part where I started blending over the black, but basically I just took my really dark blue color and just ran it all over the black and extended out, blended it outward a little bit closer to the shoreline. And here I'm taking kind of my lighter blue color and I'm blending it between, just running it back and forth over the green and that dark blue, getting a nice little mixture of hues. And you don't really have to spend this much time fussing over this. I spent probably more than I should have going back and forth, trying to get the perfect mixture of the different blues and browns. But a natural river, there's no perfect variation as far as the shallows versus the depths. So really don't spend too much time doing this. I think I ended up going over it twice, and really I didn't think I had much of a different effect going over it the second time. So just do a kind of a quick once over, mixing all those three colors together, and it's really pretty painless. As someone who really is pretty meticulous on his miniatures about my wet blending, if I do it, I really found that this was, you did not have to be so anal about this. So with that, I got about, half my river done, and it only took me a few minutes. And now I'm just going to use the exact same technique to do the other side of the river there. And if you've never done any wet blending, perfect opportunity to give it a shot. All right, when you use it on miniatures, you pretty much use the same technique here, just over a much smaller area. So again, just go over it quickly. And again, another reason why you don't have to fret is when we put what will be our water effects, which is just clear caulk that you use for showers or windows. It kind of, blends together the colors nicely, kind of distorts all the different hues beneath it, so it, looks like a genuine river. Here I am, again, fretting over it not being dark enough in the middle, and I probably put more unnecessary layers than I actually needed. You don't need to fret this much. You can get it over with in a few minutes. Save yourself some time. But there I went over and just made sure that the middle had a nice enough darkness to show kind of the depths. All right. And then the final step is I'll paint in the really dark brown, which will be like my upper shoreline where I had all that big aquarium rocks. And I like using kind of really thick gravel here is to give an illusion of kind of being a bank above the river. We're doing this on a very thin piece of canvas, and we're keeping the layers pretty thin. So we're going to try and use a bunch of different tricks to give an illusion of depth and height to the bank. Because, you don't have flat rivers. They usually lie down a little bit below the banks. So using this kind of coarser gravel will help with that. And then we're going to put a bunch of greenery on top of it to, again, give it that sense of height that you won't get otherwise. So we're going to be using lots of illusions, using that wet blending to give the idea that, there's a deep middle to our river and some, shallower areas and then right up onto shore. And when you step back from a few feet with the finished product, it'll look right. It'll look like there's more depth to it than there actually is. So again, I'm just finishing with this dark layer. We will be dry brushing it to, again, give it some nice highlights on it once it dries. All right, so there we go. With the paint, we're all done. And even right here, it looks pretty good. If you really want to do, you could just kind of stop right here and call yourself finished if you're happy with this effect. And you'd still get a better looking river than if you just, just cut out, like blue cloth or something like that. So now I'm just going to kind of zoom out and show the result after the paint has dried and the blend has kind of settled. And I like the effect I like the effect a lot. And our next step will be to do some overbrushing on the shoreline, some dry brushing to make it look a little bit better when we place all of our flock and greenery. But I really like it. As I said, you can just leave it here if you don't want to do much more work, and you'll have yourself some pretty good looking rivers. But if you want to go that extra mile, it won't take too much more extra effort. So again, I added some kind of bigger rocks along the river line too. Again, I want to give the illusion that the shoreline is sitting quite a bit a ways above the river. And so we'll paint those as well later. I use a pretty easy process for painting my rocks, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to overbrush or dry brush the parts with that aquarium gravel, that rougher stuff, because I'm going to allow some of it to show through. I'm not going to cover the entire shoreline with flock and with greenery. I'm going to let some of it show through as you'd see on a typical bank. And so we want to make sure we have some good highlights on there. So for my dry brushing, I'm just going to mix that really dark brown color I use for my shore with some buff titanium, kind of a beige white, and get a kind of this light brown. And I'm just going to coat the tops. I'm not really going to call it dry brushing. It's more over brushing. I'm going to load my paintbrush up quite a bit. Make sure that as I go over it, only the deepest parts in between the gravel remain that really dark brown. All right, so this will be your mid-tone. As again, when you're painting miniatures, when you're painting terrain, it's good to have shadows, a mid-tone, and a highlight. So, there you are. After the mid-tone, I'll go and paint my other section of river the same way. And again, don't worry about getting too much brown on one section. Just tell yourself, hey, there's not as much highlight on that section of this river. Don't fret too much. Nature is not uniform. Don't worry about it. As a great painter once said, there's no errors, just happy mistakes, right? So as you go along, there my rock was coming up. I used super glue to put them down. I don't think they're quite dry. So got my mid-tone done. Now I am going to go over it with just the buff titanium here in a moment. And I'm also kind of putting a base layer on my rocks here with that brown tone. I'll go over them with gray in a few minutes. But that'll let the gray stick to the rocks a little bit better with that warm tone beneath it. All right, so once I got these rocks coated, now I'll go to my high highlight, which is just going to be buff titanium. And again, with dry brushing, you want to wipe off most of the paint on a paper towel, and I kind of test it with my hand to make sure that very little paint is rubbing off on it, and then I'm just going to rub it over the very tops of that gravel to give it a very high highlight and show kind of a differentiation between all the different levels on that bank. And the finished product will look pretty good here. And again, don't fret too much with this. If you get too much of a high highlight somewhere, I don't worry about it, but if you want, you could put a wash over it to knock it down a little bit. But there we go. Quick and easy. We got our bank pretty much done and ready to be flocked and everything. All right. So now I'm going to use my caulk, this clear caulk that's used. I don't know, you can find it for windows, showers. I really don't like using resin. You have to plug up either side of your river, and it's messy, and you have to use a bunch of fancy effects to get ripples and things. I don't really like it. So I just use this shower caulk, which you're going to find is incredibly sticky. And I'm just going to lay it down my river, and I'm going to use a bag and press it against the caulk to give nice ripple effects. And this goes for $3 a tube. All right. And I used maybe, I don't know, a third of a tube in doing this. So I'm just going to use my fingers. I'm just going to lay down a glob and spread it. But my God, is this stuff sticky. So I'm just warning you, do it on a surface you don't care to, I don't know, make a mess of. Because this stuff is sticky. It will stick to your hands. It will stick to anything it comes in contact with. So just warning you. And it has a pretty long cure time. Like, I believe it took about a day and a half to completely dry. So also keep that in mind that there is a dry time on this, but it's pretty easy to use and it is very cheap. I find that most of the other kind of simulated water that's used in terrain is expensive and there's not a lot of it comes in the bottles. This is a cheap alternative and I think it looks just as good. So here again, just spreading it with my finger. And once I get it spread all the way down the river, and just like our other caulk, you don't need a big layer of this. You really don't. Once I get this completely down, I will then take my bag and just run it over it to give it the rippled effect that I want. So here we go. And again, when you first put the bag down, the ripples are going to look weird. Like they're going to be very pointed, very jagged. Don't worry. The caulk will settle and it will look like pretty natural water effects. All right. And again, don't have to fret too much on this. It will look good. Just trust me. Once it dries, everything will look right. All right. So I got my first section of river done. And one thing too, when you're using this, spread it in the middle and then spread it out towards the shore. That's something I learned after doing that first section. Putting it on the edges, for whatever reason, kind of was hard to spread. So, got the first section done. Now let's move on to our second river here. So again, same kind of thing, just putting a nice glob of it down the middle, spreading it out towards the shore. And for this one, I really decided just to go as quickly as possible, not fret too much with how thick or thin I put on the caulk. Just put it on there quick, run the bag over it, get the effects, and it will be good. So quick and easy water effects, and while it takes a while to cure, as I said before, you don't have to make sure you hold the ends of the river in place or worry too much about it drying. It'll just be tacky for quite a while. So nothing really special you have to do. Run the bag over it to get our ripple effects, and boom, cheap and easy water. And the stuff's pretty durable too. It dries almost like a rubber. All right. So here we go with running our bag over the tops of the caulk. You can see how sticky that stuff is. All right, and voila, we have our water done. All right, so we're getting towards the end of our rivers here. We don't have too much more to do. All we really have to do now is flock and put on our kind of vegetation on our rivers. All right. So I went ahead and kind of finished one river just to see what it looked like. I painted the rocks, which I'm actually not going to cover in this tutorial. I really just put 2 layers of gray down and highlighted them and put a wash on them, and pretty easy. But if you look at it, I think it looks really good. I think I put some flowers along the side to give it some pop. Put some lichen down, some clump foliage, and a bunch of different not woodland seedings, army painter grass clumps, and it looks good with a little bit of static grass, of course. And here, if I just put it on these, what's laying around, it definitely is flexible. There was no cracks in any of the caulking that I can see. So it looks like this will be a great way to make that flexible river that I was hoping for. And I think it looks really good. It might not look as good as some of those, professional foam made rivers that you might see on some other channels. And again, those look great. They're spectacular, but man, do they take a lot of time and oftentimes a lot of money if you use some of the products like the resin water and things like that. So here, with the other river length, I actually put down some painter's tape because as I did my first length of water, the caulk for the water effect still wasn't quite dry. It was still a little tacky, and so when I put down my flock, I noticed it stuck to the river. So I had to go and remove it with duct tape or a lint roller, and I didn't want to do that for my second river, so I just kind of covered it up to help protect it. So first, I am going to just lay down a bunch of different kinds of basing foliage. Basically, I just went through everything I use for basing my miniatures, grabbed some, and I'm just going to throw it down there. A bunch of variation. I'm kind of have the idea that this is like a northern European river, and it has a very kind of lush riverbank to it. For this river, though, I'm going to put a little less flock down. I'm kind of going to let a little bit more of the riverbank show. My other section, I really covered almost all of it, all the sides of it with some flock. And I'm just going to, see how I like it to have a little bit more of the riverbank showing through. And here I'm, of course, blocking the camera with glue, because why not? All right. So, and again, we're also putting all this vegetation down to give it that illusion of depth. That's why I'm putting on some really big clumps of lichen down on the edges to make it look like, man, these things are really standing up. Make it look like the river is down quite a bit a ways beneath it. All right. And again, you don't have to do this. You can just put down some flock or even just leave the stone shore for your river if you don't want to do this. But I liked how this looked. So I put everything I can down that I can find. All right. I've got a bunch of these little flowers that I really like that I got off eBay. So I put those everywhere. And then once I'm ready to kind of flock, I just put down some PVA glue, which I watered down just slightly. And I'll just line wherever I want the grass to be. And since I don't have a static grass applicator, I'm doing it the old-fashioned way of just pushing clumps down onto it. And then I'll kind of pick it up here and kind of shake off the excess and kind of make the flock stand on end. And I'll do that for both sides. And for flock, I like to put down a shadow layer or a dark layer, and then put a little highlight on top of it of some almost yellow grass. Again, just to kind of give it that nice variation in color. So I'm just covering it up, and you notice there's a little bit more of the shore showing. And in the end, I actually like this better. I thought it looked a little bit more realistic with more of the bank bare. And so here I'm just coating it with putting on the highlight for the grass. All right, shaking it to make sure, it kind of stands on it. If you have a static grass applicator, you don't have to worry about that. But I do it the old-fashioned way. So there we go. And really, again, this was only an hour and a half of actual hands-on time. There was a lot of drying time. I had to let, especially that clear caulk took forever to dry. But the hands-on time that it took to build the river was really minimal, and I would not have been able to build 4 feet of river in the same amount of time by carving out foam and doing the traditional method with the resin. So I am super pleased. I think this might be the best piece of terrain I've kind of explored with and fooled around with. I think it turned out great. Hopefully you will be able to take something from this video. I think that I will be making a bunch of different segments of river now using the same type of technique. So I hope you enjoyed watching it and keep playing with those toy soldiers.